What happens when a quiet waitress at a fancy restaurant becomes the target of a millionaire's cruel game? You won't believe how one unexpected challenge turned into a moment that stunned everyone, breaking egos and rewriting the rules with nothing but raw talent and courage. This isn't just a story about music or power. It's about a secret strength hiding in plain sight, waiting to explode. Stick around because what happens next will blow your mind and might just change how you see yourself forever. Can you imagine the audacity? One waitress, one arrogant millionaire, and a grand piano. What began as a vicious attempt to humiliate her transformed into a moment that hushed the room and obliterated egos. You'll be floored by how she flipped the script with nothing but her raw talent. It was a balmy Friday evening, the air buzzing with chatter at La Fontaine, a swanky restaurant nestled in the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina. The clink of crystal glasses, the soft patter of servers' footsteps, and the gentle hum of jazz drifting from a corner piano wove an atmosphere of pure upscale indulgence. Oh, how elegant it all seemed. Deborah, a 25-year-old waitress with a quiet grace and a fiery spark in her eyes, glided between tables juggling plates and flashing warm smiles. To the well-heeled patrons, she was just another uniformed worker, but beneath that apron burned dreams far grander than the opulent dining room around her. Serving tables. That wasn't her passion. Music was. Ever since she was a little girl, the piano had been her sanctuary, a sacred space where she poured out every joy, every heartbreak, every unspoken longing. But dreams don't pay the rent, do they? Grueling shifts at La Fontaine were her reality, a necessary grind to inch closer to the music academy she yearned to attend. Only a few co-workers knew her secret, catching her stealing fleeting moments at the dusty upright piano in the back room during breaks, her fingers coaxing melodies from the worn keys. That night, as the dinner rush began to ease, the door swung open with a flourish, and in strutted Leonard Grayson. Oh, you couldn't miss him. The wealthy entrepreneur stormed in like he owned the place, flanked by a posse of polished cronies. Leonard radiated arrogance, his sharp tongue, and love for theatrics legendary. His mere presence made even the veteran staff snap to attention. Deborah's colleagues swapped wary glances. Leonard was trouble, the kind of guest who got a kick out of rattling people. To Deborah, though, he was just another table in a long night's slog. But oh, how wrong she was. This was no ordinary evening. As Leonard's eyes swept the room, they locked onto Deborah. Something about her, a quiet strength perhaps, caught his notice. A brief pause, then a sly smirk curled his lips. Deborah felt the weight of his gaze like a predator sizing up prey, but she shrugged it off, focusing on refilling water glasses and clearing plates. Little did she know Leonard had already cast her as the star of his cruel little game. Deborah's story began far from Raleigh's glitz, in a small South Carolina town where big dreams felt as unreachable as the moon. Her mother, a single parent and relentless caregiver, worked back-breaking double shifts as a nurse to keep food on the table for Deborah and her siblings. Despite their tight circumstances, music was the heartbeat of their home. Her mom's scratchy vinyl records and a rickety, out-of-tune piano gifted by a kind neighbor sparked Deborah's love for melody. That piano became her escape. While other kids ran through sprinklers, Deborah was glued to the keys, teaching herself to play. She mimicked radio hits, then dove into classical pieces scavenged from second-hand music books. Her talent shone bright. She played at church services, school recitals, community fairs, but acclaim couldn't erase the financial walls blocking her path. By 18, the truth hit hard. A music career would have to wait. Scholarships fell through and family duties came first. So Deborah tucked away her dreams of concert halls, swapping them for the practicality of a paycheck. But the piano, it wasn't just a dream, it was who she was. When she moved to Raleigh a few years back, she chose La Fontaine, not only for the wages, but for that majestic grand piano in the corner. She rarely got to play it, but its presence was a quiet comfort, a reminder that music was still there, patiently waiting. That night, as Leonard and his crew settled in, Deborah approached their table tray balanced with the ease of experience. Leonard ordered a top-shelf scotch and tossed out a loud joke fishing for laughs from nearby tables. Deborah flashed a polite smile, her voice steady, despite the odd vibe he gave off. "Deborah, huh?" he said, eyeing her name tag with a glint of mischief. "Sounds like a name, with some hidden talents." The remark threw her off, but she nodded courteously and slipped away to submit their orders. She missed the sly grin he shot his buddy, the way his eyes tracked her every step. Leonard wasn't just watching, he was scheming, and Deborah was about to become the unwilling centerpiece of his twisted show. The night rolled on the room alive with laughter and the clatter of silverware. Deborah kept her rhythm, dodging Leonard's piercing stares as she wove between tables. She'd handled tough customers before, but this guy, he was different. Not just rude, but calculating, like a storm cloud hovering over her shift. His presence made her skin prickle an unease she couldn't shake. By the time she served their appetizers, Leonard was in full performance mode, though not the kind she expected. He dominated his table, boasting about his business triumphs and tossing out snide digs at those who lacked ambition. His entourage cackled on cue, while other diners rolled their eyes, irritated by his volume. Deborah tried to stay focused, but as she returned with a bottle of wine, Leonard pounced. "Tell me, Deborah," he said, his voice slicing through the din. "What do you do when you're not hauling plates around? A young lady like you must have big dreams." His words froze her mid-pour, the bottle trembling slightly in her hand. She hesitated, then offered a cautious reply. "I play piano sometimes," she said softly, hoping to shut it down. But Leonard's eyes gleamed, and a wicked smile spread across his face. "A pianist. Well, isn't that something?" he crowed. "Why don't you give us a little show?" Deborah's heart stopped. The room seemed to hush, his challenge hanging like a guillotine. "Oh, I couldn't," she said, forcing a shaky laugh. "I'm just here to work tonight." But Leonard wasn't having it. "Nonsense!" he bellowed, his voice filling the restaurant. "There's a piano right over there. Let's see what you've got. Surely a budding star like you isn't scared of a little crowd." His buddies snickered, lapping up the drama, while curious diners craned their necks. Deborah's chest tightened the weight of their stares, pressing down like a physical force. She wanted to refuse to flee, but his taunt lingered, daring her to step up or shrink. "I really shouldn't," she stammered, glancing around for backup, but even her co-workers seemed frozen, unsure how to intervene. Leonard leaned back, swirling his scotch with a smug grin. "Oh, I get it," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "All talk, no talent." What a letdown! His words stung like a whip, cutting deeper than she'd expected. Deborah's hands balled into fists at her sides. She wasn't one for fights, but his dismissal, treating her like a nobody. A punchline lit a fire in her gut. Her mother's voice rang in her ears. "Never let anyone make you small. Deborah, you're bigger than they'll ever know." A tense silence stretched between them. She glanced at the piano, its polished surface glinting under the chandelier, then back at Leonard's smug face. His smirk was a dare, and against every instinct screaming to walk away, she took it. "Fine," she said, her voice low but steady. "I'll play." The room buzzed with anticipation as Deborah marched to the piano, each step heavy with fear and defiance. The dining room fell silent, every eye on her as she approached the grand piano, its keys gleaming like a gauntlet thrown down. Her fingers shook as she slid onto the bench, the spotlight of the chandelier isolating her from the whispering crowd. Leonard lounged in his chair, smug, as ever certain he'd already won his cruel game. Deborah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady her racing heart. It pounded so fiercely she could barely think. This wasn't the safe haven of church recitals or cozy community gigs, this was a battlefield. But there was no retreat now. She placed her hands on the keys, their cool touch grounding her. The first notes came out soft, tentative, almost fragile, like a whisper in the dark. A few diners shifted, someone coughed, but Deborah shut them out, her focus narrowing to the music. She chose a piece etched in her soul, Debussy's Clair de Lune, soulful and haunting. The melody flowed into the room, delicate yet unyielding, threading through the air like a lifeline. As her confidence grew, the music swelled her hands, dancing with a grace that masked the storm inside. Each note was a confession, carrying fragments of her life. The sacrifices her mother made, the late nights practicing in a tiny room, the dreams she'd held on to despite every setback. The room's chatter faded, replaced by a profound stillness. Even Leonard, who'd been murmuring to his cronies, fell silent. Deborah didn't need to see him to feel the shift. The mocking vibe dissolved, replaced by something deeper. Was it awe, humility? Whatever it was hers, earned through every chord she played. Oh, how the music soared! Deborah let herself go, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she wasn't just a waitress scraping by or a dreamer wrestling with doubt. She was herself, an artist, pure and unapologetic. Her fingers danced across the keys with a passion that set the air ablaze, drawing out emotions so raw, so vivid, they seemed to swirl around the room like tendrils of smoke. Can you imagine the power in that moment? By the time she struck the final chord of Debussy's Clair de Lune, the room was frozen, the lingering resonance of the piano, the only sound in a sea of stunned silence. Deborah sat there, hands trembling on the keys, her heart pounding. What would happen next? Had she risen to the challenge or fallen into Leonard's trap? Then, like a dam bursting, the audience erupted into applause. The sound was deafening, echoing off La Fontaine's elegant walls, filling the space with a warmth Deborah never saw coming. Some diners leapt to their feet, clapping with such fervor it brought tears to her eyes. Her co-workers, who'd been watching from the sidelines, joined in, their faces glowing with pride. "You did it, Deborah," one of them mouthed, eyes shining. But Leonard, oh, he stayed seated. His smug smirk wiped clean off his face, replaced by a look she couldn't quite pin down. Shock, discomfort, maybe both. He raised his hands and clapped, but it was slow, hollow, a weak echo against the roaring cheers around him. Could his half-hearted applause dim her shine? Not a chance. Deborah had reclaimed her voice, her soul, and no amount of his condescension could steal that away. As the applause began to fade, the room seemed to let out a collective breath, the tension melting into something softer, almost sacred. Deborah stood slowly, her knees still wobbly, but her spine straight as steel. For the first time that night, she truly saw the people around her not as judgmental spectators, but as witnesses to her courage. Their faces held something new, admiration, respect, and a touch of awe that made her heart swell. She didn't glance at Leonard right away. Instead, she offered a small, graceful nod to the diners who'd clapped the loudest, her lips curving into a faint, genuine smile. Was it pride? No, it was relief. Pure, overwhelming relief that she hadn't let fear silence her song. But then, like a magnet pulling her gaze, her eyes found Leonard. There he sat, hands clasped tightly on the table, his once arrogant smirk nowhere to be found. His face was a mask of forced calm, as if he was torn between admitting he'd been wrong or doubling down on his ego. Well, he said, his voice too loud, shattering the delicate quiet that had settled over the room. That was unexpected. He forced a chuckle, but it was weak, lacking the bravado he'd wielded so easily before. I guess talent really does pop up in the most surprising places, doesn't it? His words fell flat like a deflated balloon. His companions swapped awkward glances, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Deborah tilted her head, studying him with calm intensity. His comment was meant as a peace offering, but it was empty, weighed down by his refusal to fully own his misstep. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, deliberate, carrying a quiet strength. There was no warmth, no bitterness, just truth. She wasn't about to let him drag her back into the box he'd tried to shove her into. Her performance had spoken louder than any comeback ever could. Leonard cleared his throat, squirming under the room's collective stare. He waved for another drink, a pathetic attempt to claw back his composure. "You've got quite a gift," he muttered, the words grudging like they pained him to say. Deborah nodded, once her gaze unwavering. "Everyone's got a gift," she replied, each word heavy with intent. "It's what you do with it that counts." The room seemed to hold its breath again, the subtle bite of her words rippling through the air. It wasn't loud or confrontational, but, oh, it was enough. Leonard shifted in his seat, his usual swagger crumbling with every second. Had he ever been so thoroughly outshone? The diners gradually returned to their meals, but the atmosphere had transformed. Gone was the stuffy hum of privilege and pretense, replaced by something richer, a shared respect for the waitress who'd reminded them all of authenticity's power. Leonard wasn't just humiliated. He was laid bare, his charm, no match for the truth Deborah had unveiled. She stepped away from the piano, the weight of the moment settling deep in her chest, a mix of triumph and quiet resolve. Her colleagues greeted her with hushed smiles and subtle nods, their eyes saying what words couldn't: "You're incredible." As she returned to her station, she still had a shift to finish, but something had shifted. Her head was higher, her movements more assured, each step radiating a newfound confidence. Leonard's table had gone quiet. His entourage, who'd laughed so freely at her expense earlier, now avoided her gaze, their chatter reduced to whispers. The bravado that had filled their corner of the restaurant was gone, leaving only an awkward silence in its wake. The night pressed on, but Deborah felt lighter, like a weight had lifted from her soul. Every step through the dining room felt purposeful, her confidence blooming in ways she hadn't anticipated. Patrons stopped her with kind words. "You're absolutely incredible," an older woman whispered as Deborah set down a coffee cup, her eyes misty. "I've never heard anything so moving. Don't you dare stop." A man nearby chimed in. "You've got something truly special. Don't let anyone tell you different." Deborah thanked them with quiet humility, her heart swelling with gratitude. These weren't just compliments. They were affirmations of everything she'd fought for, every dream she'd clung to, despite the odds. Leonard, though, he wasn't so generous. When Deborah approached his table to drop off the check, he looked up, his expression caught between irritation and grudging respect. "You've made your point," he said, his tone sharp. "No need to rub it in." Deborah paused, locking eyes with him unflinching. "It was never about proving anything to you," she said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through his defenses. "I just wanted to play." Leonard had nothing to say to that. He fumbled with his drink, his once dominant presence reduced to an awkward fidget. The power had shifted completely, and everyone at the table felt it. As he scrawled his signature on the check, one of his companions, a younger man with a kinder demeanor, looked at Deborah and said, "You were amazing." Truly, his sincerity caught her off guard, a glimpse of humanity in a group she'd written off as shallow. "Thank you," she replied, offering a small, genuine smile before turning away. The night ended with Leonard and his crew slipping out quietly, their usual flashy exit, replaced by a hurried retreat. Deborah watched them go, feeling neither victory nor spite. Leonard was already fading from her thoughts. Her mind was racing toward the future. The tips that night were unusually generous enough to cover her rent and leave extra for the piano lessons she'd been putting off. As she locked up La Fontaine and stepped into the cool night air, her lungs filled with the crisp promise of possibility. For the first time in years, she felt certainty. She wasn't just a waitress, not just a dreamer. She was an artist, and nothing. No mocking words, no financial struggles, no fear could strip that from her. Walking home, her thoughts weren't on the night's clash, but on what lay ahead, her dreams feeling closer than ever. In her small apartment, Deborah sat at the worn bench of her old upright piano, her fingers gliding over the keys. The sound wasn't as rich as La Fontaine's grand piano, but who cared? The music flowed from her heart, pure and true, just as it always had. That night had changed her not just a fleeting triumph, but a revelation. Her talent wasn't something to hide or defend. It was hers, and it was enough. In the days that followed, the story of her performance spread like wildfire. Patrons shared the tale, and whispers of her brilliance became a local legend. A few days later, a call came from a man who'd been dining that night, a music producer from Nashville. He wasn't promising fame or riches, but a chance to record a demo, a small step toward the dreams she'd only dared to imagine. Deborah said yes, not because she thought it would make her a star overnight, but because it felt like a door cracking open, one she was fearless enough to step through. For years, fear and doubt had whispered lies, telling her she wasn't enough, that her dreams were too big for her small-town roots. But now, she saw the truth. Resilience and authenticity were her superpowers. The showdown with Leonard Grayson wasn't just a spectacle flipped into victory. It was a wake-up call to the strength of her integrity. Leonard, with all his wealth and bluster, had nothing that could dim her light. He was every doubt she'd ever faced, and she'd silenced him with the purity of her craft. To anyone hearing her story, Deborah's message rang clear. Never let anyone define your worth. The world is full of Leonard Grayson's people who puff themselves up by tearing others down. But real power, it comes from standing firm in who you are, letting your passion roar louder than their scorn. As she closed the piano lid and rested her hands on the faded wood, Deborah smiled, her heart brimming with hope. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like it had truly begun. So what about you? What dream have you been holding back, scared off by fear or doubt? Don't wait for a Leonard to challenge you. Take that step now. If Deborah's story lit a spark in you, subscribe for more tales of resilience and triumph. Your story could be next.